Welcome to the College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line. Here's Shehan Jeyarajah and Bobak Hayeri.
Hey everybody, it's the College Football Survivor Show. I'm Bobak Hayeri with my co-host Shehan Jeyarajah, national college football writer for CBS Sports. We're glad to have you with us. Today we're beginning a series examining all the teams within the Power Four conferences that have grown, bloated, I'm not sure, to sizes that warrant splitting each one into two shows. So today we're going to start with the Atlantic Coast Conference, which just wrapped up their spring meetings amidst a swirl of discontent over money. And what better place to show their concern over cash than at the exclusive Ritz-Carlton Resort on Amelia Island? But despite all the interconference lawsuits flying around, the ACC presidents joined the Big 12 in becoming the second named party in the House versus NCAA to vote to settle the case and related antitrust suits. But we're going to step back from the deluge of litigation and into the shelter, the domed stadium, if you will, of on-field expectations for the upcoming season. And we have a guest today. Alexis Cubit from the Louisville Courier Journal joins us to talk about it. But before we dive in, let me remind you that you can find us on X and TikTok at CFB Survivor Show, where we have video highlights of the show, run polls, and listen to your feedback. Please, if you can, take a second to like, rate, and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. But before we begin, I want to introduce our guest. Alexis Cubit covers the University of Louisville for the Louisville Courier Journal. She's been on that beat for a few years, and prior to that, she covered Clemson for the state and has had moments herself in Big 12 country, as well as some time in my fine state of Minnesota. Alexis, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys for having me. I'm excited.
I have to ask, though. Did Bobak get Louisville right? Did he say it right? How are you supposed to say it?
He did. I was told, so I moved here 2 years ago, and I was told you have to say it like you have marbles in your mouth, so Louisville. So you got it.
All right.
Yeah.
That makes it, and that silent P in Clemson, like somebody pointed it out to me. When you're not familiar with the school, you're like, wait, what? That's how, I love it.
Yeah, or South Carolina, some South Carolina Carolinians say it Clemson.
Clemson.
Like a clump. Yeah.
I think it's easier to come up with Clemson when you think of Dabo saying little old Clemson. I think that then it just rolls off the tongue.
Yeah.
I love it. So this is going to be our first in a series of shows like this. So Shehan, I love this format. This is one that you've kind of developed out. Why don't you explain for our listeners how we're kind of going to go through all of this?
Well, of course, we're the College Football Survivor Show, and we talk year-round about the college football playoff. And so how we're going to go about it is I want to touch on every single team, like you mentioned, in the Power Four. We'll also touch on some Group of Five in another series of shows later. But we're going to run through the 9 teams that we've got, half of the ACC and half the ACC plus Notre Dame. Obviously, we're going to cheat and get them in there as well. But so half the conference today, and we're going to categorize every single team into one of 3 categories. And that would be college football playoff contenders, the middle class, or the bottom tier. And what I want people to remember heading into this is we've done this show and come up with CFP contenders in a 4-team playoff. And that is not what we're here to evaluate today, right? So a team that maybe would have been an ACC title contender before and maybe considered the 17th best team in the country. Today, in a 12-team playoff, that team could rise to the level of college football playoff contenders. So it's going to be fun to go through this. Again, this is the first time that we're evaluating teams in that kind of way. My hope, and we're going to be learning right here with the rest of y'all, is that we find at the end of this series that, hey, maybe there's 25 college football playoff contenders. Maybe there's 30 as opposed to 7 like there's been in years previous. So I'm excited to get into it. And I will say too, just to intro the ACC a little bit, this is as wide open a group with as many nominal college football playoff contenders as maybe any conference in the entire country. Of course, Florida State wins the league last year, but they turn over basically their entire roster. And I'll tell you what, I cover TCU a whole lot down here across town from me. And when you lose all of your good players, you can't just guarantee that it's going to go the same way the next year. And I think that you also have programs like Clemson who have won national championships. You have programs like Miami that have added so much. You have programs like Louisville that really shocked the world in a lot of ways last year. So I'm really excited to get into it. I think this is going to be one of our most fun series of shows.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to this. And so let's kick this off. The first team we're going to talk about is a team that gets a lot of attention, especially in the offseason, a potential national title contender, although they're a little bit, their level has dropped just seemingly a bit, but can they return? And that's Clemson. They failed to win 10 games for the first time since 2010. They went 4-4 and finished without a winning conference record for only the second time under Dabo Swinney. So much of the conversation about the team has been about the coach's apparent aversion to using the portal. They were the first, or probably the only non-service academy to not take a single transfer in the offseason. So Army, Navy, Air Force, and the fourth branch of the armed services, the Clemson Tigers. So instead, they're opting for internal improvement, which has certainly worked before for the Tigers. But they're going to have to do it after losing 5 defensive starters to the NFL, along with star running back Will Shipley. What do you guys think? As our experts, where do we go with them? Are they going to be a contender? Are they middle tier? Or are they a bottom tier team?
So the year I covered them was their 10-3 year when like the world was ending and, the dynasty was over at that point. And I just feel like people were overreacting, but now it's kind of like, it's not looking great. The year after I left, they fired Brandon Streeter and, thought that getting in Riley would be good to kind of help Cade. And then that didn't work. And, then the defense was the strength. And then you lose all those guys. So now it's kind of like, I don't know. It's you would hope that you could be a developmental program because I think that's obviously where Dabo's had a lot of the success. But we're in a very different time right now where, you can even look at that on the basketball side and, you're winning with experienced guys. You don't have the freshman talent that's getting it done anymore, the, sophomore. So you need that experience. So, I thought it was funny. I saw kind of a little clip of a Dabo quote when he was talking about the portal and how he's like, well, we don't want those guys anyway because nobody wanted Clemson. And it's kind of like, when a guy gets rejected, he's like, well, you weren't that pretty anyway. I was like, well, of course you're going to say that now because you have to save face a little bit. But yeah, it's one of those things where it's just kind of, you're looking at it now like, it might be time to maybe not hit the panic button, but at least hover a little bit because, like I said, you have, Louisville that's coming up. You have, Florida State that seems to be, back on top. You guys mentioned Miami, obviously. It's a lot of programs now that are starting to make it a little more even where Clemson is not as dominant anymore. And so, yeah, we're just kind of looking over like, you guys okay? You good?
No, I agree. I think that this is a fascinating program to try to evaluate because you see 9-4 and that doesn't sound that bad, but that 4-4 record in conference play and then ACC that really was not very good last year. That really is the concern to me. They're falling back not just to the pack of college football, but to the pack of the ACC itself. And I think that you look at what they're losing, of course, on the defensive side of the ball, 5 NFL draft picks, not even counting, by the way, Andrew Makuba transferring to Texas as well. That's 6 of their best players.
That was shocking.
Yeah. And obviously, I think that he was a freshman when you were there. And he was one of the ascendant stars in college football in a lot of ways. And so it does, for me to see this team as a legitimate ACC contender and a legitimate contender for the college football playoff, it's going to come down to the offense. And I have a lot of faith in Garrett Riley. I think that Cade Klubnik is a very good player. I don't know that, I was always a little surprised by his number 1 overall ranking as a quarterback coming out, but I do think he's talented. It's these receivers though. It's these receivers. That's been the huge issue at Clemson. And that's been the position almost more than quarterback and defensive line that Dabo Swinney has made his career on, a former wide receivers coach, of course, when he became
wide receiver youth.
Exactly. And so they have some exciting players coming in as freshmen that I like. Bryant Wesco is a kid from out here, actually in Texas, who I think is going to be a star for them, but like not now, not right now, I don't think. And so it's crazy. So I'm going to right now, I will put my vote in for them being a middle class team right now and not a CFP contender heading into 2024. We can always elevate them later, but I don't think they deserve it right now.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that middle of the pack, they haven't completely fallen off. Like you said, finishing 4-4 sounds about right as far as them kind of being in the middle.
Wow. Well, I'm going to say if 10-3 was a crisis before, hearing that kind of a verdict, that's a 5-alarm fire if you're in Clemson right now. But I love it. Let's move on. So the next team, the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets down in Hotlanta. Brett Key seems to have Georgia Tech heading in the right direction in his first year. They made their first bowl appearance since Paul Johnson's final season in 2018. The reigning Gasparilla Bowl champs have quarterback Haynes King, who put up more than 3,500 total yards and 37 touchdowns after transferring from Texas A&M. He's one of only 2 players in the nation last season who had over 2,700 passing yards, 600 rushing yards, and 25 touchdown passes. The other one was the reigning Heisman winner. So that said, Georgia Tech fielded the worst total defense in the ACC and gave up 6.3 yards per play. How do you feel about these Yellow Jackets and where they're heading into their second season under Brent Key?
It's kind of surprising the defense would be so bad considering Brent Key. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I would probably put them in the lower tier. I don't think they're quite middle and definitely not a college football playoff contender. I just think it's going to take a little more time. I think they're competitive. Obviously, I mean, they took Louisville down to the wire there in that season opener last year. And, we're in some games, but I just don't think they're quite there yet. There's still some pieces that just have to be put together. And I mean, Haynes is great. But yeah, I don't see it right now.
Well, I don't know. We just put a 4-4 team in the middle class. We're going to put a 5-3 ACC team in the lower class.
Well,
they finished with a winning record last year.
Yeah, but I don't know. It's a lot different this year with just, the addition of the teams and structuring things. But I don't see it from Georgia Tech this year.
No, I'm going to be fascinated with them. Of course, they played a pretty tough non-conference slate last year, playing Ole Miss in the non-conference slate. Obviously, they played Georgia every single year. And so, they finished 7-6, but like if they play 2 winnable games in that schedule, like we're talking about an 8 or 9 win team potentially, right? And so I am very excited by what Haynes King can be for this program. They also were very lucky to get to the record that they got last year. I mean, they needed an all-time Mario Cristobaling in order to get one of those wins, and they all count. I mean, they all count, but I do think that if they don't get that victory, if Mario Cristobal doesn't completely fumble the bag, of course that ends up being a loss. I think that, look, you look at their non-conference schedule, it's more manageable this year. They play Georgia State, they play VMI, they play, obviously they've still got Georgia on the schedule. And I mean, Notre Dame, I guess, is their other non-conference game. So that's always going to be a tough matchup for them. But, and I mean, the other thing too, is that they do play more of the ACC title contenders this year. I still think that they deserve the classification of middle class, though. I think that, and that's a huge compliment to Brent Key. That's a huge compliment to Haynes King, in my opinion. So, Bobak, you're the deciding vote then as the number 3. What do you think? Bottom tier or middle class?
Well, I was interesting because as Alexis was talking, I thought, yeah, their goal right now is to confirm that they are a middle tier team because their expectations are much more modest. So I don't mind the idea of classifying them as bottom tier, but with that, like we just said with Clemson could be a CFP contender. I think with Georgia Tech, we're saying they could be a middle tier team. We just need to prove that one year wasn't an aberration. So that's how I would kind of, I would side with Alexis, but I do like the idea that we're seeing this is their confirmation to an upside, and where they're going to be in that direction. Cause that's still that's a tremendous improvement over where Jeff Collins had the team.
Well, when they go 9-4, I will bring back the clip from this podcast and send it straight to Haynes King.
We need to see them make their way back in the Orange Bowl somehow. That was still one of my favorite seasons where they were just, it was Mississippi State. Oh my goodness. That was that game that was like New Year's Eve and it ended at like midnight Eastern. So, oh my goodness, those were wild. Moving to the next team. So now we have our honorary ACC member, Notre Dame. They are entering this season with great expectations as Marcus Freeman enters year 3, which is an auspicious year in Notre Dame coaching lore. Last season, he put together his own first 10-win season. While Sam Hartman was not necessarily quite the level they had hoped, he put together a decent enough season. He's now in the NFL along with Joe Alt and Audric Estime. They had lost their offensive coordinator who took over at Troy as head coach, but they brought in a big name with Mike Denbrock, who coached Jaden Daniels to a Heisman at LSU. So now they've got a new transfer quarterback. Riley Leonard came over from Duke, another top 10 high school recruiting class. Let's see. What do you guys think? Is this going to be a year for the Irish?
I mean, if we were talking, again, like you guys mentioned before we got started, if we were talking the 4 team, I'd be like, we're talking 12 team. I'm going to consider them a contender. I don't know what it is about Notre Dame being like the ACC adjacent for quarterbacks of like, I kind of want to get out the ACC, but I'm still going to play like ACC schools. But no, I've been a believer in Riley for a little bit. I remember, his freshman year, and I'm like, okay, this kid is pretty decent. And then, you see what Mike Elko's been able to do there, and now he's obviously at Notre Dame. But no, I think there's a lot. I mean, kind of like we're talking about for Clemson, there's a lot to be said of tradition. And, even though Notre Dame got thrashed by Louisville at Louisville, that was kind of a crazy game. But, I mean, they still managed to have a decent year. So I do think that they have what it takes to be that contender. It will definitely be interesting to see what Marcus Freeman does this year and just kind of some of the changes that have happened. But I think you always have to give a team like Notre Dame a chance to kind of get in there, especially, finishing, I think it was top 20, I think it was 75. So I'd say contender.
No, it's interesting because last year, of course, they win 10 games for the first time under Marcus Freeman, and they probably should have had more, right? That Ohio State game was decided right at the goal line. They do lose some key pieces. Audric Estime at running back is probably the one that I'm most interested to see. But the other piece that you have to mention is that some of these great recruiting classes of the past 2 cycles are starting to age up. I look at linebacker, for example, where Jalen Sneed and Drake Bowen, who were both borderline 5-star players, have a chance to potentially take over those spots. And, defensively, I think that you just kind of assume that they're going to figure it out. Offensively, of course, more turnover, but I don't think that upgrade from Jared Parker to Mike Denbrock can be understated. Like, when they decided to promote Jared Parker to offensive coordinator, I didn't get it. I did not get it whatsoever, right? He had never been a play caller at this level. He was coming from being a tight ends coach. Like, it never made sense to me. And I don't think he did a horrible job by any means, but especially in the passing game, I just did not feel like he had the juice. Like, I did not feel like he was able to elevate that unit. Now you're bringing in the guy who not only coached Jaden Daniels to the Heisman, but coached Cincinnati to the college football playoff as an offensive coordinator as well, and helped turn Desmond Ridder into an NFL starting quarterback. Now I don't think he'll be a starting quarterback that long, but he was there. He did it. He was there. He participated. And so I think that is, to me, a massive coaching upgrade going from Jared Parker to Mike Denbrock. I don't know how Notre Dame managed to convince Troy to make Jared Parker their head coach, but that's one of the biggest moves of the offseason in the college football playoff. So I'll put it this way. If Notre Dame is not a college football playoff contender, then like Marcus Freeman might not be it. And I kind of think that Marcus Freeman is it. So I'm going to put them in my college football playoff contenders.
Could you imagine if we suddenly see Troy appear in the Notre Dame schedule like next year? Like there's an away game at Notre Dame or something, probably at Troy.
Mike Denbrock's got to bring out the big guns if that happens, man. He's got to drop 70 on those fools.
This is like the tremendous. If this is the dream year for Notre Dame, we're going to suddenly see that kind of like we got to pay him back. Here's a solid. Oh my goodness, I love it. And to be fair, we're in a universe where theoretically that could be a round 1 playoff game if things really get weird. And that's the one thing in the 12-team playoff. There's been so much conversation about the fact that Notre Dame can't earn a bye,
because they can't be a conference champion. But the benefit of that is that if they make the playoff as a high seed, they'll get to host a game like basically every single time. And you look at, especially under Brian Kelly, they had these teams, of course, that were top 4 caliber and certainly top 8 caliber very often. I mean, if Marcus Freeman can get back to that level, it means that you're going to see a home game for Notre Dame almost every single college football playoff. And I'll tell you what, that's a pretty exciting prospect if you're a Notre Dame fan.
Absolutely. So now let's move to a team that has had issues with meeting preseason expectations for several years in a row, it feels. North Carolina. So despite fielding the number 3 overall pick in Drake May, they disappointed in 2023 with an 8-5 record and a 4-4 ACC record. So like Clemson. They bring back one of the top running backs with Omarion Hampton, but there is so much uncertainty beyond that. The defense was one of the bottom 3 in the conference last season. Now they have another A&M transfer quarterback, Max Johnson, in line to take over from May. But the rest of the roster, as we said, is filled with question marks. Where do we put the Tar Heels?
I struggle with not putting them in the bottom, but I kind of feel like in this age of the ACC, they might be in the bottom. And we're not, I mean, obviously it was 2 years ago where they're in the ACC championship, so the mighty have fallen hard. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like North Carolina, like you said, always has these expectations like, okay, Mac Brown is going to do it. We're going to have this great year, da-da-da. And then it just always seems to falter in one way or another. And I don't think that this is the year that changes. Again, like I said, especially with the ACC kind of being more competitive and, teams really kind of taking advantage of the portal and NIL and all these things. And I don't see them really being, that competitive. Like you mentioned, they obviously have pieces that could, get them to that middle pack. But North Carolina is one of those ones that just seems to always kind of under-deliver.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you look at the past 4 years. They've got they had 1 year below 500, but the other 3 years they win 8, 9, 8 games. Like I think that they have had such high expectations because of what Mac Brown has brought there with first Sam Howell, then of course Drake May coming in. I don't think that Max Johnson, the Texas A&M transfer, is that guy. So I think that if they're going to have a chance to be, to potentially get into the ACC conversation like they have been the last 2 years, they're going to need it to come from other places on the roster. And I even think at receiver last year, their losses after 2 years ago. I think that Josh Downs was on Drake May's first team. He graduates, he goes to the NFL, and they try to replace him with Tez Walker, who's ruled ineligible for so much of the season. And I didn't really feel like they had the talent around Drake May to kind of elevate him. Which, by the way, a completely different conversation. But watching 2022 Drake May film and seeing how much of 2023 was on his receivers, I don't know how Drake May ended up outside of the top 2 picks. Like, I can't believe that we let the New England Patriots have Drake May. It is such garbage. I cannot believe it. But, that is life. I've seen this happen too many times before that the New England Patriots just end up with nice things, and I hate it. Now, I will say they have some talent at running back. Like you mentioned, Omarion Hampton. Like, I'm not saying he's the best returning running back in college football, but he's in the top 5. Probably the best in the ACC. Alexis, am I forgetting anyone? Or
no, I think you're probably right. That would probably be one of the best running backs in the ACC right now, for sure.
Yeah, like I love David Martinez transferring in from Oregon State to Miami, but like I don't think you can, as a transfer, just assume him as the best running back in the ACC. So yeah, like they've got the best running back probably in the ACC. They've got some good players on the offensive line. They've got some talent at receiver. Defensively, it just hasn't come along at all, really, under Mac Brown. But they did make some strides, especially after Phil Longo left. And I think that it's easier to play defense when you're not playing on the other side of Phil Longo as an offensive coordinator. But it's definitely between the bottom and the middle. They're another one of these tweener teams, I think, to me, like Georgia Tech, where I think that their upside is 8 or 9 wins. Their downside is they definitely could miss a bowl if Max Johnson doesn't work out for them. I lean towards the middle class, But Bobak, what do you think?
I think this is such a rebuild for them and their uncertainty in a lot of ways. So I lean towards they would need to prove it to me, and less of an optimistic Georgia Tech where I think they have that ability. I think just based on what we've seen before and their underperformance with some of the tools they had at their disposal before, I'm going to assume that they're going to be kind of at that border and potentially flirting with being a bottom tier team. So I don't necessarily mind placing them there at this point to see where they land. So was I the tiebreaker on that one?
You were.
Yeah. So wow, we're just throwing people down to the bottom
Yeah,
into
I'm
the
like,
basement.
you guys are
goats,
tough
sir.
graders, man.
We are. We're brutal.
We're the Simon Cowells of the ACC.
I'm over here trying to be like, guys, I could see the vision. I don't know. And y'all are like, no, I don't think so.
Not happening.
Y'all are staying home for Christmas this year.
My goodness. So let's move on over to one of their lovely rivals, the Duke Blue Devils. They lost
their
Coach
lovely rival, not one of. It is their rival.
Yeah,
that is the team.
So they lost Coach Mike Elko to Texas A&M, but they hired Manny Diaz in his place. They lost Riley Leonard to Notre Dame, but they brought in Texas transfer Malik Murphy to take his place. Diaz is obviously a great defensive mind, so we should see good development on that side of the ball. The Blue Devils have performed well over the past couple of seasons under Elko, winning 17 games in the last 2 seasons, but they only return a little over half of their production from last season. Where do you guys see Duke?
Okay, I'm gonna take Shehan's approach to Duke. I would consider them middle. I would say middle tier. I do think that there are obviously a lot of questions when you have a new coach and just the turnover that they did, but I don't know. I mean, obviously Manny is no stranger to the ACC, but I think this situation is a little different than Miami. Obviously there weren't a lot of expectations before Elko did what he did, and now they're starting to get excited about football. Helps that Coach K's gone, but there there's a little more excitement, a little more expectation now with this football team, and I don't know. I think maybe this will be the spot where Manny finds a better fit. Obviously not the same resources, but just because it's a different level there at Duke in terms of expectations and different things like that. I don't know. I have a good feeling about Duke this year. Definitely, obviously not playoff contender, but given what the ACC is right now, I would probably say middle of the pack.
Wow. Okay. So you're gonna take the pro approach on them. I'm definitely gonna lean towards the con. Now, I will say they have some things to be excited about. I love them bringing in Malik Murphy. He is a big time player. Not to be clear, he's not going to be Riley Leonard from day one. Like he's just not. But I think that in a year or two, he has a chance to be a really special player for this team. I like the fact that they went out and hired SMU's co-offensive coordinator Jonathan Brewer as their offensive coordinator. That's always the piece whenever a defensive head coach gets hired, is I want to see that they're willing to be dynamic. That's always my question mark, right? Like, are you going to try to like pack it in and slow down the game? Or are you going to try to go out there and chuck it around? Because like that's how you win in college football these days, especially in the ACC. So I do like the fact that he went and did that. I just question whether there will be a transition year. Like if you ask me in 2 years, like if you ask me in 2025, is this team middle class? I think that I'm there on them. But after losing some of the 5th and 6th year seniors that they had in the defensive backfield, after losing their quarterback, after, it's just a lot of guys to lose. If I'm not mistaken, they lost their star running back as well. So I think it's a little bit too much to overcome in year one. Like you said, a lot of focus right now on Duke football because Baylor keeps stealing all of Duke's best basketball players, as we all know. But I do think that there's a lot to be excited about. It just might not come for me in 2024. So Bobak, you're the deciding vote once again.
I'm with you on this one, Shehan. I think that while I'm positive on where Manny Diaz will take them, and maybe they'll be able to surprise us and be in that middle tier, I think just the sheer losses that they have, losing your head coach, losing your quarterback, losing so much offensive production, I need to see more before I see. But in a weird way, I'm more optimistic than North Carolina, because North Carolina, it's like I know who the head coach is, and I love Mac Brown, but I'm just not sure what's going to happen.
National champion, Matt
yeah,
Brown.
and a national treasure in so many ways. But I'm not sure with them. With Duke, I have optimism, but I'm just like, I don't know if I'm I'm willing to put them in the middle yet, especially with some of these other teams. Not necessarily we're going to get to today, but some of the other teams in the conference that we've got there. But, moving from North Carolina, I want to go to that ACC hotbed that is the Metroplex. And SMU enters its
My
first
backyard.
season. ACC enters the ACC. Probably SMU enters the ACC, and it's probably being they were snubbed from the opportunity they deserved last season to get destroyed by Oregon in the Fiesta Bowl when they won the American, their first conference championship since 1984. We won't talk about what happened a few years later, but that was when when the Pony Express was at its peak. So the Mustangs return the core of an 11-2 team under Rhett Lashley. They include starting quarterback Preston Stone, who we know from the last episode, Shehan is really hot on that quarterback. They've got a good running back in Jalen Knighton and tight end RJ Maryland. And money is clearly no object in University Park. They're happy to just be in the ACC, but can they make that splash?
No, I don't think so. Well, okay, I say that because they have a losing record against Power 5 teams over the past 3 years. And I think it's going to take a little bit for them to catch up. I mean, like you guys said, obviously they have the resources to do it, but I just don't think it's going to happen this year. I think there's a natural adjustment. I mean, you look at how some of the teams did last year jumping into the Big 12. Cincinnati taking Scott Satterfield off of Louisville's hands, and them obviously not doing so well. But I think that's such a big jump. You see players do it, but I think when it comes to schools, I just feel like there's an adjustment period that it's going to take to be able to compete. And it's not like the ACC is like, the SEC in terms of, resources and just pouring over money. I mean, obviously with Florida State and Clemson and North Carolina, you see that, but I do still think that it's going to take them a minute to adjust to a different level of competition. And again, we just keep talking about how the ACC is getting better. I think, SMU and Cal and Stanford are coming at a very interesting time where it's like, there's this incline, but how do they figure into that? And I just think right now, given what they've done in the past, like I said, against Power 5 teams, I don't think it's going to happen this year.
So one small piece of concern that I have for SMU is that they had 3 different offensive line starters who could have come back, enter the portal. I don't love that. If all 3 of them come back, I think that to me, it's like, I feel really good about them potentially not just competing, but maybe even winning. But there's a couple pieces that I like. One, I mean, they've got one of the best quarterbacks in the ACC, like straight up, in Preston Stone. I think that he has a chance to be really special, not just for this team. And he is not just one of these guys who was like developed in a system. Like he was a high-end top 150 type recruit as a quarterback coming out, had offers from Alabama and the like. The other thing that I like most probably about them is that I think on the defensive line, they have a chance to be really special, just with some of the players that they added. You talk about teams adding a lot of transfers, and certainly that's significant, but specifically SMU added, I mean, is it exclusively, I think it's exclusively transfers from the Power 5. Like they have exclusively added SEC transfers, ACC transfers. You look at a player like Jonathan Jefferson coming in from Georgia, a former high-end 4-star defensive tackle. That's the kind of player that doesn't usually transfer to a school like SMU and doesn't really end up outside of Clemson very often in the ACC. So I think that when you look at their high-end talent mixed with the development that they've had over the past couple of years, to me, look, you said it. It's going to be a transition. It's going to be difficult. And definitely that piece about success against Power 5 competition. I was going back and looking, and it's like, obviously TCU is one thing. That's their rival. That's a tough team. Last year they play Oklahoma. They play them pretty well. Like I'm not that concerned by them losing that game. And I mean, they've been competitive in their games against Power 5 competition. Of course, a 1 touchdown loss to Maryland on the road that they really should have won, by the way. They nearly beat TCU during their run to the national title game. So like they've been very close, in my opinion. So I feel like this could be a year that they get over the top. I also love Rhett Lashley as a coach. I think that he is a rising star in the profession. I think that, I'm curious, maybe we'll go through at some point and look at the top coach in the ACC. I think that he would be higher than, I would probably have him higher than most when it comes to the ACC. So I think that the question just becomes, right, like, one, can they continue to have consistency on the offensive line after losing a couple of key pieces to other power conference schools, by the way? And can they integrate this defensive line quickly? If they can do that, I mean, listen to how many teams we put in this bottom tier. We've put so many teams in this bottom tier, and I don't think that SMU is anywhere close to that bottom tier. And they also have a pretty fortunate schedule overall. They get it's really a 2-game season for them in the ACC. They play Florida State on September 28th, and they go to Louisville on October 5th. If you split those games, like, that might be good enough to get you to 7-1 in conference. Like that might be good enough with who else they have to play. So I have him as a CFP contender. I have him as an ACC contender. Bobak, you're the deciding vote once again.
I thought both of you made some great points, and Alexis, especially talking about their record against other power teams. And it made me think of all the new additions to the Big 12 last season and how they kind of floundered a little bit. Although I don't think any of them came in with a quarterback quite like Preston Stone and quite with the talent that SMU is bringing in this season. And, there's something interesting here, Shehan, as you were talking. I thought about the fact that who they can get to transfer in some of these P5 transfers, with the SEC limiting players from not transferring within the SEC. If you want to stay in the region, there's a handful of teams that can potentially make it worth your while. And SMU certainly could now be positioned to be one of them in the Metroplex. So
what do you mean by that? Do you mean that they're paying players?
Hey, you can pay players now. That's all I'm saying, in different ways. But at the same time,
no, they're doing charity work to get that money.
Exactly. They do a Zoom once in a while and just wave at some people, and there you go. But at the same time, I was just thinking about how, as a program, SMU I think they are the best of the 3 teams that are coming in. I think we'll talk about the other 2 a little bit later, but I think they have that opportunity to be a mid-tier team. And I'm going to kind of put them there now, especially compared to some of the others that we've been talking about. So we'll put them mid for now.
When they win 11 games, I'm going to text Rhett Lashley and say that Alexis and Bobak doubted him.
If it helps my great aunt, I have SMU alumni in my family, so I'll probably hear it from them as well.
Me too, but my sister does not care whatsoever.
I love it. Well, when we get back, we'll get through the final 3 teams in our part 1 of the ACC.
The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line.
All right, so as we wrap this up, we've got a couple more teams to get through, several more. The next one, also going back to the wonderful state of North Carolina, we go to Wake Forest. Now, their first post-Sam Hartman season did not go quite as well as they'd hoped. They finished 1-7 in ACC play. Dave Clawson's signature offense ranked second to last in both scoring and total offense. Now, there were injuries and other kind of bad luck factors, but they need to focus on improvement in 2024. They have quarterback Hank Bachmeier coming in from stints at Boise State and Louisiana Tech. Where do y'all see the Demon Deacons?
It's just wild how. No, because I guess I really am a little mean. Maybe the final 2 I'll put in middle tier and playoff contender. But yeah, it's just amazing to see that how far they've fallen. They were a top 10 team in 2022.
Yeah.
And then just kind of went real downhill in the final rest of that season. And then last year was just kind of a disaster. And I mean, we had Clawson in 21 that was like up here. And So I don't know what happened. I mean, obviously you lose players and different things like that, but it just seemed like such a hard fall for Wake Forest. And I'm not real sure that this will be the year. Maybe they can take a step, but I don't think this is the year that they kind of get back to the level that they were once at.
Yeah, this is brutal, to be honest. I think that, look, I'm not gonna pretend to be an expert in Wake Forest's NIL situation, but it feels like that's been a huge factor, is their struggles with player acquisition and retention. By the way, they lost 15 transfers, only brought in 5. They lost transfers to Alabama and Nebraska and NC State. Like, these are guys who should be on this team this year. Not even, of course, counting losing Sam Hartman a year ago to Notre Dame. And like Dave Clawson, we actually did our coach ranking at CBS Sports a while back, and I think he was in the top 30. Like, people, like, we understand how good Dave Clawson is, and he's been able to kind of plug along and develop and keep guys for 5 or 6 years and put them in good positions. And I worry that that might not be possible anymore at Wake Forest. That it just the relative lack of investment might be just killer at this point, that there might not be anywhere else to go. Again, you just look up and down this list and there's so many players who ended up at power conference schools as transfers. And those are players you have to keep. And if you don't keep them, you have to replace them, right? With other transfers coming in. I'm just very concerned, not just about this team for next year, but existentially about Wake Forest and what they're going to be. And that makes me very sad because I love the job that Dave Clawson has done there. Hank Bachmeier coming in, that is one of the weirdest, like, most random additions. Like, he basically didn't play last year at Louisiana Tech, and Louisiana Tech was a tire fire. So, like, I don't know, sure, take a chance on him, but I just I hate it. I really hate it.
Yeah, no, I just want to say I don't need to be a tiebreaker on this one, but I'm all for this one. I think we're seeing Wake Forest to an extent return to where a lot of folks remember them being before they kind of would punch above their weight. I still remember the 2007 season. That was a season where everyone was like, Wake Forest suddenly came alive and, just completely embarrassed some teams there. I think it was
Baylor
Florida State
legend
in
Jim
that season.
Grobe coaching that team, of course.
Yeah. And people don't realize what he achieved because that season was a shocker for those of us we're on the older side. And remember,
we know how good he is at turning things around.
Yeah. So my goodness.
We definitely know.
So now we're going to go to another wonderful ACC program, fresh from the west side of the Bay Area. The Cardinal want to change this into the Pacific Coast Conference. Now, they're entering, obviously, an ACC. They're going to be making 3 cross-country road trips in their first season. Troy Taylor, who did a tremendous run at Sac State before he went to Palo Alto, he went 3-9 in his first season, but they played some of those games pretty close. Stanford ranks number 2 nationally in returning production, and they have an emergent quarterback in Ashton Daniels and some good wide receivers to back him up. They've also lost a couple of great players also in the transfer portal. But where are we seeing the mighty Cardinal color enter this particular ACC season?
Yeah, I thought I would be more optimistic about the last 2, but I forgot Stanford was on the list. If you can't win, I mean, okay, let me say this. The Pac-12 was pretty difficult last year. I will give them that. I do think it was very competitive. Obviously, you see that. But I don't know that Stanford has won 5 games. I mean, Stephen Herron transferred in from Stanford to Louisville last year, and I mean, he didn't even sniff a bowl game.
Yeah, it was 2018 was their last time winning 5 games.
Wow.
Okay. Yeah, so that would have been, I think, the year he graduated from high school. So, yeah, no, I think this is a pretty cut and dry bottom team.
Yeah, so I do think that there are reasons for optimism. I will say, yes, they're a bottom tier team for sure. But I do want to say I'm pretty excited about what they're doing. One, I think Troy Taylor is a very creative coach. Like, he is a lot of fun. I'm excited to see what he's going to do with that program long term. And I'm not just saying that because one of my buddies on our CBS Sports team is a Sacramento State grad and is obsessed with what he accomplished there. But I think the other piece, they have the second most returning production in all of college football heading into this upcoming season, only behind Iowa State of all teams. And they've got a quarterback. Like, actually, you can take a lot of what I just said about Duke and apply it to Stanford too. Like, I think that with Ashton Daniels, he is a potential star at the position. And the other thing too is that Alik Eomen, or I think that I said that wrong. He might be the best wide receiver coming into the ACC this year. He is ridiculous. He was such a big part of Stanford last season. The question, of course, is going to be, can they continue to grow up that roster in time for this upcoming season? I don't necessarily know. But if this is a team that made a surprising jump to a bowl game, I wouldn't be shocked. I don't think I'm quite there as yet on them, but I expect that they're going to be pretty improved. And actually, the other thing that you have to say about Stanford is that they won 3 games last year, but 2 of them were in conference play. They got better as the season went along as well. So I'm excited to see them, and I'm going to see them also probably lose quite a bit next year. So they're in the bottom tier.
Yeah, certainly that Colorado comeback was a spectacular win for Stanford last year, and it showed that they have some ability to put things together. But again, not this season. So now we're going to wrap this particular group up with Alexis, the team you cover, the Louisville Cardinals. Not the Cardinal. We're going plural for this one, Cardinals. So first year, Jeff Brom took his hometown program to a shocking ACC title run in his first season, winning 10 games for the first time as an ACC program. I do remember when Louisville joined the conference. So he went transfer heavy again in 2024. He brought in 32 transfers at positions across the roster. And then they had some weird moments, like they had running back Penny Boone and edge rusher Tyler Barron, and then they didn't. So obviously the biggest transfer is Tyler Shuck out of Texas Tech, the quarterback. He's projected to be the starter. Tell us, Alexis, where should we expect the Cardinals to be heading into this season?
I'm going to sound like such a homer, guys, and I'm not even going to lie. I'm going to put them as contenders. I say that because they were one bad Pitt loss away from being in that conversation. Even with the loss in the ACC championship, I think you kind of put them, flirting in the top 10. But the Pitt loss was just, I was watching, I don't know what happened. Like, it was bad. So for them to do what they did last year with zero expectations, Brom had 4 months to work the portal, keep together the recruiting class. Really not even 4 months to keep the recruiting class, because obviously the early signing period there in December. So I guess that would have been like a week or two to keep them together. And to do what he did, that speaks a lot to him as a coach. When you have the resources, because Louisville's NIL is decent for football. They definitely have a lot. You look at what Pierce Clarkson does with the Ville, and they have some people backing them, and so getting starters, SEC starters out of the portal, getting guys who made plays in the Iron Bowl, for Alabama. And the other one to add to that list is Wesley Walker from Tennessee. He also had a 4-month stint in the Bluegrass State. Those are some weird situations, but not uncommon, obviously. That's how Louisville ended up getting Cam Kelly and Storm Duck last year. They went to, Penn State and where was Storm?
I think North Carolina,
where Storm
right?
was, but after he left North Carolina.
Oh, there was, okay. Good question.
Virginia.
Oh, Virginia. That's
Virginia,
right.
that's what it was.
Right.
Yeah. Cam was at Virginia, and then Storm was at Penn State, I believe it was, and then ended up coming to Louisville. So, that's, again, the day and age we're living in, where players can go somewhere for 4 months and then leave for a third school. But yeah, I don't know. I think the biggest concern, I would say, for Louisville would be receivers. It's gotten to the point they were so shallow during spring where they started cross-training quarterbacks at receiver, which is really interesting because, I guess that's good because it's like you've got athletes who can do that. And then also too, guys like Ja'Cory Brooks were injured. So they'll have those guys for the fall. But I think that's a bit of a concern. I think, the cornerbacks look really good, but I think their passing defense is a little bit of a question just because of what USC did to them in the bowl game. And then some moments during the season where it just looked like other teams had better athletes lining up against their DBs. But I think you get a huge boost with Quincy Riley coming back. Jarvis was a big loss, but I do think they have some good cornerbacks who will make plays. I mean, you got Corey Thornton from UCF, who's pretty good. Tayon Holloway from North Carolina didn't play a whole lot, but I think there's some optimism there. Tavian Nicholson from Illinois, so you have pieces. Safety might be a little shaky, which they'll need some help. I mean, obviously the portal is closed, but obviously you can still get players from there, so maybe need a little help at safety. But I don't know. I think with the way that their schedule is built, you have Notre Dame, which obviously is not an ACC game. You have to go to Clemson, which no matter what, playing at Clemson obviously is not difficult. They had a 40-game home winning streak for a while that poetic justice, South Carolina, their rival, ended. But yeah, I think they have. I have Boston College being a trap game for them, just because there seems to always be that kind of one little hiccup. I think going to Boston College will be that for them. But otherwise, I mean, I could see them right back in the way that their schedule is built and the way that the ACC championship teams are now. I can definitely see them back in that game this year. I think they have an elevated level of talent. Tyler Shuck is, I mean, I don't think anyone's going to argue that he's better than Jack Plummer when healthy. That will be the main thing, but I do think that he'll be able to stay healthy this season. All of Louisville will be ready to give body parts for him to be healthy this year. But yeah, I can definitely see being a contender this year.
So I have two questions. So first of all, so for people who don't know, you of course went to Texas Tech, and Texas Tech fired a coach and collapsed. You went to Clemson during the most disastrous year.
Oh my gosh, you're not going to do this.
You went to Louisville, and their women's basketball team stopped being 1 seeds anymore, and their coach ended up leaving. So how was Jeff Brom able to survive the Alexis curse?
You know what? I think it must be something. He's a very devout in his faith, and maybe that's what it is. Maybe the Catholicism was a little. It got a little higher than the Baptists, and well, I can't do that, but just kidding, just kidding. Right? No, just kidding, guys. Yeah, I don't know how he's been able to escape it, but I'm definitely glad that he is. It makes me feel a whole lot better. Although Louisville lost, the women's basketball team lost in the first round of the NCAA tournament for the first time under Jeff Walls. So I'm just going to say that, Jeff Brom is the one I influence more than the rest. But, yeah, I'm trying to fight the Cubit curse. I don't know how, but I'm going to have to ask. I go to talk to Jeff tomorrow, so I'm going to have to ask him how he managed to reverse that. But I'm glad he did, because it makes me feel a little better about myself.
So, look, I do have one serious question, and you mentioned Tyler Shuck, clearly the guy at quarterback when he's healthy. He's never been healthy for a whole season in his entire career, essentially. So if that happens, if the worst happens, is it just over, or is there what's kind of the backup plan, or is it kind of, are they in big trouble?
That is one of the biggest questions for me, at least. That was one of the biggest questions during the spring. Who is the backup? Because, I mean, you play 9 quarterbacks last year in a game, which sounds great in theory, but then when Jack Plummer's struggling, it's kind of like, all right, we're just going to have to let him play through this. There was no one that they could really put in last year. It was like, okay, give Jack some relief. So Harrison Bailey, Pierce Clarkson, and Brady Allen are kind of the guys up for the job. Pierce is just really small. I think they have him listed at 6'1", but it's giving 5'10", 5'11".
Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that.
No, you know what? There is nothing wrong with that. We stay on a short game. Well, I mean, relatively speaking, that's obviously still tall for real people. But that's still tall. But in the football world, obviously, as a quarterback, that makes a difference, especially at this level. But I will say this: he's mobile. He's able to find guys when he needs to, and obviously being able to scramble is something that is important. So I think in certain packages he works. Harrison and Brady have more of the height, and but I just think they're still a little raw, and still kind of developing. So there are questions in terms of, God forbid if something happens to Tyler, what does Louisville do at the backup position? And that's just a question. Even after spring practices, I don't know that I can answer that question right now, which is a little bit of a kind of an eyebrow raiser, because you would hope that, you have a clear guy, but I don't think right now there is a clear backup. If I had to guess, I would probably give the nod to Pierce, just because it seemed like to me he got more second team reps. But right now, I just think that's still up in the air, which, that was the case my first year here, when Malik Cunningham was playing, and then it ended up going to Brock Doman, but that was during fall camp. So maybe we'll get some clarity and some resolution by fall camp. You would hope, because, season's kind of around the corner.
No doubt. And so I think that the upside of Louisville is being in the ACC title game. It's being in the CFP race. I'm going to put them in my CFP contenders. And I think that a lot of this just has to do with trust in Jeff Brom, right? Like, you see what he did in 1 year, taking a team that was very much middle of the pack, winning a lot of close games, and doing it with a lot of guys who weren't his, a lot of players that weren't his choice. And even I think that you look back, I mean, how many coaches in the history of college football have gone to programs like Purdue and Louisville and made conference championship games in consecutive seasons at two different schools? That's pretty crazy stuff. So I think that Jeff Brom is like a lot of this is just straight up trust in Jeff Brom, that he's going to figure it out, that that he feels like, okay, we have some answers at quarterback in the room, that if we don't, like at times they didn't last year, we're going to be able to scheme around it. We're going to be able to be good defensively. So I think that Louisville, I mean, it's funny. I remember when Scott Satterfield left, I'm like, so what's the plan? Are they going to do this impossible Jeff Brom dream once again? But he's here. It's worked. He won 10 games his first season here. First time winning 10 games since joining the ACC, which is pretty crazy to think about. And like, I think I think he's the kind of coach you just have to trust that he's going to figure it out. And in an ACC that's wide open, why not Louisville?
Absolutely. So now that we've had a chance to talk about these 9 teams, let's wrap up with kind of a question. And again, this can be any of the ACC teams, including the ones we haven't talked about. Who do you think, Alexis, is the best player in the conference, regardless of position?
I tend to side with defense. I love a good defensive battle. So again, going to be a little, I guess, homery. I'm going to say Ashton Gelati. I think that he's extremely dominant. I mean, he's already in some, early 2025 NFL draft mock drafts. He, obviously last year was a little different for him. They had him being a little more versatile on the line. I just think he's so dominant and he's so quick, that he's going to wreak havoc on a lot of offenses. I just think that he's going to be that guy for Louisville this year. I mean, obviously he played a huge part in their defense last year, double-digit tackles for loss, double-digit sacks. But yeah, I think he's going to be my player.
Well, then how about your underrated player? Who do you think we're missing out on, and who do you think is going to maybe be a surprise, or at least bigger than people realize heading into this ACC season?
I had to really think about this, because I feel like the ACC lost so many players to the draft last year that it was hard to think like, okay, who's actually going to come back? I mean, obviously we talked about Amarion there at North Carolina, but my kind of like sleeper pick is Thomas Castellanos at Boston College, their quarterback. Even though Louisville beat Boston College last year, he's very talented, very athletic. I don't think he gets the attention just because Boston College is what it is. But that's a guy, I mean, I saw something on Twitter that said that he looks like Kyler Murray in some aspects, but like I said, just very athletic. He can throw and pass, very much a dual threat quarterback. That is going to definitely give Boston College at least a chance. And I think he did that in a lot of games last year. So I would say Thomas Castellanos is my underrated player that I think people should pay a little more attention to. Don't mind the record. Football is an individual sport, not a team sport. Just look at
No. No, I love it. I really like that pick. I think that they've just been looking for anything dynamic from that position for the past couple of years. Phil Jerkovich had his nice start to like 3 years ago. It never really came to anything, and I think that so much of the Jeff Hafley era was defined by not getting dynamic offensive play in any aspect. And eventually the stuff that they did well on the defensive side collapsed, and obviously he ends up leaving. It'll be interesting to see him working with Bill O'Brien, of course, now as the new head coach at Boston College. That could be a good or a bad thing. I'm fascinated to see what it ends up being, of course. But I do think that that he has a chance to be a special player, and especially again in a league where everything is wide open. And I think that, I mean, again, there's maybe one or two teams that eventually will rise above the pack, but I think everybody else is kind of still in the pack. I mean, you mentioned, of course, we go through and there are 9 teams, 5 of them we consider to be bottom tier, 2 in the middle class, right? So like there aren't many Goliaths in this conference. So I think that Thomas Castellanos has a chance to really cause some havoc in this league.
I think that's a great pick, and I agree. Bill O'Brien's going to make it absolutely fascinating. Well, this has been a very interesting conversation about half of the ACC, as well as 2, I think, really interesting players. I like the Ashton Gelati pick. That was an interesting one, and he was on my list as well as potential guys to look out for as a top tier guy. But probably if Louisville is a CFP contender, he's going to be a big part of that. Absolutely. Well, I wanted to take a second as we wrap this up to first of all thank all you listeners. We always appreciate you, and thank our guest Alexis Cubit, University of Louisville beat writer for the Courier Journal. You can read her there and follow her on Twitter and X at Alexis_Cubit. And are there other places we can find you, or are those the 2 best places to find you, Alexis?
Yeah, those are the best. I try to keep my Instagram a little more personal as to how it knows my Facebook, but Twitter is where I try to be, or sorry, X, excuse me. X is where I try to be a little more professional.
X is going to bring it to you when it comes to professional tweets.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my God, that was
I'm old enough that I can
ever.
make dad jokes now. You don't understand how much I kind of savored this. My goodness.
Oh my gosh. You know what? That's the silver lining to the craziness. And I didn't even think about that, so thank you.
Well, I also want to thank our producer, Joey Aliberti. Be sure, if you can, take a second to like, rate, and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on X and TikTok at CFB Survivor Show. He's Shehan J. Raja. You can find his work at CBSSports.com and at Shehan J. Raja on X and TikTok. I'm Bobak Hayeri, part of the team that runs Reddit CFB. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Have a good one.
The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line.